LED lights are on, yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah, that is really,
up to you.
No, because she has to be here as soon as we start. So.
that's better.
Commissioner, did Ann take off for a while? Is she coming right back?
She's looking to grab the charger for the laptop. We're having some technical difficulties.
We'll wait for her. I don't know how it looks on TV. We all,
I don't think they need to see all of my pores.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Every-
like,
Okay. Please rise for the pledge allegiance to the flag. Pledge allegiance. Could you do roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Donaldson,
Here.
Commissioner Geeson Fields,
Present.
Commissioner Jennings,
Here.
Commissioner Waddy,
Here.
Chair Kent.
Any ex parte communications or disclosures?
Nope.
Nope.
Not much to disclose because it's all documents. Okay, moving into the consent calendar. Does anyone like to have any comments on the meeting minutes from last?
I just
which I
have
was not part of.
I just have one sentence that I would like added to the meeting minutes. I can give you. It's item number 6, page 4, line 3. It's just an additional comment that I made that wasn't reflected in the minutes, and just to state, the Ramona intersection seems restrictive since you can only make a right turn going north onto Solano Avenue. I just want to make sure that that kind of comment wasn't missed.
Okay.
Otherwise, that's it.
Are there anything else on the consent calendar that anyone wants to pull or discuss? Is there anyone from the audience that would like to pull anything from the consent calendar? Hearing nothing, I guess someone want to make a motion to approve the
Now
consent?
I can move approval of the consent calendar with the changes to the minutes that Commissioner Geeson Fields suggested.
All in favor?
Oh, do we need to second? I can second.
Oh, okay.
Moved and seconded.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Passes.
Do you want to tell them that if they're here for one of those items that's been approved? Do you want to tell them that they're here for one of
Appeal
those
period.
items that it's been approved?
Oh, yeah, well, if any of you are here for any of the items that are on consent calendar, it's been approved, so you're free to move. Thank you, Megan.
It's been approved. It's a 14-day appeal period, but good luck with your projects
Your little
moving forward.
Oh, that's the whole audience. Okay, well, just cleared the room. So public comment is really not necessary. We'll move right into discussion item, possible action on matters related to the following items. Item 6-1, Economic Development Strategic Implementation. Ann, would you like to present that? Or Jean?
Jeannie's going to do the staff report.
Okay, good evening, Chair Kent and members of the Commission. So we are back tonight talking about zoning revisions to implement the Economic Development Strategic Plan. I do have a presentation here. It is a little bit repetitive from what we've gone through before, so I'm going to breeze through it and just focus on what we talked about last time. And then I do have the actual ordinance in a Word document. If there are things you want to change, we can pull it up on the screen and make those edits. So the recommendation tonight is actually going to be to continue the item. We had a little noticing issue that we need to get that resolution of intent out and noticed, and so we can't move the ordinance tonight, but we recommend coming back in 2 weeks on the 28th. So recommending continuing to a date certain of November 28th. So, again, why we're here, we're looking at revising the use regulations, some special use requirements, and parking regulations to implement the Economic Development Strategic Plan in order to streamline commercial retail development. A couple notable things. The last time we spoke, one item we talked about was chain stores. As you may recall, the previous iteration of the ordinance talked about regulating chain stores on Solano as a major use permit if there were 10 or more businesses. We've both bumped that up to 100+ businesses as kind of an increased threshold of what is a sort of regional, maybe more local business versus something that's more of a national chain. It's still just a number, but it is bumped up a bit. And then when we get into the ordinance, we've established some findings of compatibility with the district purposes, with appropriateness of compatibility of storefront design, signage, things like that. So if you do get a Walgreens coming in, that would go through a major use permit process, and you'd have a little bit more discretion on the signage and storefront design, things like that. In terms of parking, last time we spoke, there was concern about, there was support for blended standards. Right now we have about 3 pages of parking standards for commercial uses in the city, and there was support last time for a blended ratio on Solano specifically. And we went back and talked to, but there was also some concerns about them being potentially too low. And we proposed in the ordinance is 2 tiers, so a standard for restaurants, which is a higher standard, more parking, and a standard for everything else. We ran that by one of the city's transportation consultants, W-Trans, as well as the city's transportation planner, and sort of got everybody on board there. So essentially the standards would be on Solano, 1 space per 200 square feet for restaurants and 1 space per 400 square feet for all other non-residential uses. And again, the idea here, this is an economic development plan. The idea here is not to lower parking standards or really be thinking about the intent of, the content of that parking standard. This is really about streamlining the approval process and making it easier when uses change, particularly on Solano. The other changes we talked about last time were mostly typos in the ordinance, and so those are reflected in the attachment. So I'm happy to go back through any of that if you want more of a preview, but otherwise I can also, we can take your comments, any questions, and I can, again, I'll bring up the Word document in case anyone wants to make specific edits.
Any questions of Jean?
No, this is kind of, but not really. I also wanted to ask Commissioner Waddy, I'm sure I'm mixing you and Megan's last name up, Commissioner Waddy, about, I think in the last meeting when we had this, we talked about that change from where now it shows 100+ for the chain stores. And I know we previously talked about, I think it was either number of 10 or 11 stores, and could you remind me, was that the standard for San Francisco as well as Berkeley, or just Berkeley, or?
San Francisco's is 11 or more locations worldwide.
Okay, worldwide. Okay, and then I guess if you just kind of expand on why changing from 10 to 100, I guess what?
Well, some of the thinking was, I'm thinking about some of the new businesses we're seeing in the region, like some of these salad bowl places that kind of have lemonade that has like maybe, I don't know exactly how many locations, but it could be sort of 8 or 9 throughout the Bay Area. So that may be one type of chain versus the Starbucks, Walgreens, which could be over 1,000. I mean, maybe the number could have been 1,000. I think Commissioner Jennings kind of threw that out last time. So the idea was it was an increased standard. It's not just a business that has a few a few establishments, but really something much bigger.
Okay.
And I know, actually, I mean, just a comment on that, I was thinking about that a bit last night, and I was looking up just like Phil's Coffee, for example, and they've got about 50 locations so far.
Okay.
Who does?
Phil's Coffee.
Oh, yeah.
So just thinking about something that like in your mind still feels somewhat small and kind of the kind of thing that would probably be a good fit on in a place like Solano, already has almost 50 locations. So.
Okay.
Pete's
It must have more
well
than
over
100.
1,000 probably.
1,000, yeah.
Some of the thinking too, like when the UC Village Starbucks plan check came in, that plan said actually, it looks like it's a menu of options. And so they just basically cross out sheets that are not used or parts of the plan set that are inappropriate. So they kind of have this interchangeable plan set that they use for different stores and different locations. And so that was sort of the thinking around, okay, particularly on Solano, if you want to have a little more control, that may be your opportunity to do so at the decision maker level. Obviously, staff's reviewing the plan checks and has some ability to make changes working with the applicant.
I think those larger chains, they have architects on call, if not on staff, that will adapt it to whatever you need, right?
Like the Target
Yeah.
project.
And, well, this is bleeding into just discussion, not just question and answer, but yeah, I know it's the discussion last time, and the comment that Jean referred to that I think I made was like, maybe what we're concerned about is not the chains that have 12 locations, but the ones that have, if what we're talking about is Starbucks, it's obviously a much larger number. And I don't know what the right number is. I mean, just spitballing it, 100 seems appropriate to me to to provide some kind of threshold and level of control over larger chains. But again, given that this is, the intent of this whole exercise is to generally remove barriers to commercial establishments getting set up, it seemed like, we probably wanted something a little higher than 11. So for what it's, again, there might be another number that's like the magic fit, but I think from my perspective, 100 sounds appropriate.
A little confused here, because if all we're doing, we're not prohibiting businesses that have more than 100. We're just saying they have to do a
Right.
major use permit, which is
Right.
just not that big an obstacle,
Not a
really.
big deal for them, yeah.
And why would they, it's usually the smaller businesses that have less ability to modify their plans than the big ones. So I'm not sure if we're really getting that much out of it, but,
Has less ability to do what?
Well, the larger firms, they already have the architects, they already have the design, so it's pretty polished, as opposed to a smaller operation, which is kind of rough and figuring it out for the first time, and those are the ones that maybe need more review.
I always thought that the issue, I'm confused about, I don't know which the right number is either, but I always thought that the issue here kind of was the chain businesses are coming in and they focus on their plan, their signage, their logo, their look. And they come into cities or towns and they say, this is the way it is. This is the way we do it. And that takes away discretion from the cities and towns, the planning commissions, to say, no, we have our own design review requirements, and we want the Shell station here. We want San Pablo Avenue to avoid the monument signs. And we had a big fight with the Shell station here. So I think the larger firms certainly have the resources and the professionalism to come before the planning commission to get major use permits. And I don't know what the break point is. I think 100 is too big to me. I think that it's interesting that Starbucks shows some flexibility in their plans, and I think Target did too. When they came in here, and they were pretty open about designing something that was appropriate for the CMX. But not all companies are going to be like that. I'll bet that if you had a Black Bear Diner coming in, they would say, this is the way we do it, because everyone wants to see us. I think it's particularly true with Freeway Commercial. And they wouldn't be coming to Solano anyway, probably. But I can envision others that might. A Sizzler, we don't have a Sizzler now, but that's a chain, and I bet if they came in, they would want to do it their way. Do they have 100 of them? or do they have 1,000 of them? I really don't know the answer to that, but I'm not at all worried about making a lower number threshold, because I think that the companies that have a large enough number of outlets to have a planning staff, and, you know, their own real estate experts and their own architects, they'll be doing it. I think that they would expect to come here and that we should be able to review them, in fact. I don't know what to think, but in a way, I'd be more worried about the ones that are just above small, you know, the maybe Phil's Coffee, but the ones that are growing so rapidly that they don't have a lot of experience in being flexible to where they go, and that they're kind of getting invited into a lot of communities who really want them. And if Starbucks can be flexible, and if Target can be flexible, and at a very high level of professionalism about it all, then maybe we should worry less about them than the ones that are, you know, just above 10, where the companies are growing super rapidly, and they have this sort of Uber attitude, or, you know, we're coming in here and we're going to do it. This is the way we do it.
So just a couple of observations on that. I mean, one, we're talking about adopting standards where none exist right now. So there's not currently any kind of standards that apply. And as far as I'm aware, we have not had an onslaught of any kind of chain stores trying to set up. So that's not to say it couldn't happen in the future, but again, we're talking about we're creating a new standard, and so like where do we put the threshold for the new standard we're creating? And Ann or Christopher or Jean, maybe can you weigh in? I think, you know, there's still a sign ordinance that applies, right? I mean, so kind of regardless of whether there's a use permit imposed on any threshold of chain store, like there are still some objective design standards that apply, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's
okay,
correct.
so it's not all or nothing. It's really about, like, if we are going to create a new standard, where do we want to, you know, pull the reins tight?
I agree, I hear you. I will comment that our sign ordinance is pretty liberal compared to many others. And in fact, when we did the rezoning and redid the zoning ordinance in 2004, we didn't touch it because it was going to be such a hot political issue among the Solano business owners.
Spoiler alert on that. That's something that will be coming to you in 2019 because it's way out of compliance with
In 2019.
You're gonna be looking on that. That's good.
regulations. Yeah, there was some Supreme Court ruling, I think it was 2 years ago, and so our ordinance does not comply
Does
with
not
that.
comply. Yeah, okay. But that being said, I'm thinking of like beverages and more. You know, I think they have huge signs and kind of a poor design. I wasn't on the commission when they came in. I don't remember when they even came in. But suppose that use changed, and we got some kind of new business at beverages and more. And it was a sort of a chain kind of store. I'd like to be able to review them at the planning commission level.
And there's also that new parcel that Target is now subdividing, so that could be a possibility for a new chain store location.
But that's what we're talking about here. And again, this is all up for discussion, but we're not even, the discussion has never been about whether we impose a chain store requirement in the CMX district. We've only ever talked about it being on Solano. So like even, you know, it's just, it's a different beast.
Only on Solano, I think, is that right, or not on?
I mean, that's what the
That's the way it's proposed.
Yeah.
It's just in the SC district.
Pardon?
That's the way it's proposed in the draft standards,
Solano
in the
only.
SC district.
Okay, and the parcels are all small, so what do we have to worry about? I guess we have to worry about Safeway site, maybe a couple of bank sites, I don't know.
I mean, if I can just add my 2 cents in on this. I mean, I really appreciate all the edits that you guys have done. It really hits all of the comments, for the most part, that I had in previous iterations. As it relates to the chain store issue, my feeling is, and at least my experience so far, it seems like ordinances tend to move fairly quickly here, at least from what I'm used to. And so I feel like if we come in where we don't have anything right now, start with 100 when we don't really have a whole lot of data or any kind of baseline information to know what we're going to get, what future problems are, and if, over time we start seeing that there are a handful that are sort of slipping through that we wish we would have had an opportunity to see, it seems like that would then be a ripe time to say, it seems like the real problem number are those with 50 locations, and, then perhaps we can encourage a new ordinance to come through and lower that standard to 50 or make any other edits that we want. But it seems like there really isn't a perfect location. I mean, in my experience, the 11 in San Francisco is way too low. We get businesses that we've never heard of before that are coming in that are technically chains because, they've got 10 locations in Japan and we've never heard of it. And I think again, I think the standards in San Francisco, at least at being 11, was they weren't so concerned about sort of the McDonald's and the Burger King and those major chains. They actually were more concerned at the cute little boutiques that were hitting 15 that were in every single neighborhood in San Francisco, and all neighborhoods were starting to look the same. And so I think they were trying to solve for a slightly different issue maybe with having that lower threshold than what we're trying to start with here. So I personally would be okay starting with 100. I mean, it feels a little random, but I kind of feel like with this, there is no data to give us something other than a random starting place of kind of differentiating the real big guys from the smaller. And in my experience, the big guys have been some of the challenges that I've dealt with, at least in San Francisco. It sounds like Starbucks might be an exception to that, but especially with signs and sort of demands on what size signs they have, there's this sort of sense of visibility of their signage that's been sort of ingrained into their corporate culture a little bit, and not so focused on more of a pedestrian-oriented scale of signage. And not thinking about like what's the Albany character, whereas I think the little guys are kind of like, you tell me how to, if I need to make a storefront change, or might be less likely to make a storefront change because they're not as well capitalized to sort of brand the exterior of their storefront. So I think with the big guys, you start getting into the storefront branding along with the signage signs. So I'm fine personally with starting with 100 and see how it goes. And if we start to have a problem, we'll
Tweak it.
Would we, and this is for Commissioner Jennings, would we be creating like a vested right if we change it to 100 and then, Safeway sells and we get now a giant?
I'm not giving legal advice here, but no, I mean, if Safeway vacated the, and someone else wants to come in, there's no vested right to,
But I mean, if they like, if some place that doesn't really meet our requirements goes in, and then we have the new ordinance, and they're like, oh, well, we don't want to have to change to accommodate you guys, or...
No, I mean, the only
we
thing
sell
would
our
be if
property.
it's like a non-conform, like, yes, if a different entity bought the Safeway and continued to operate the Safeway, like, that would be a continuation of, the use, like, even if it's non-conforming, but I don't think there's really a concern about creating some kind of vested rights if the business is turning over.
Okay.
Like, if it's a whole new use, I don't even think this gets into a non-conforming use. Whatever. I don't want to get too much of the weeds on that, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't. It's not something I would be very concerned about.
Okay. I mean, I guess, yeah, personally, I think 10 or 11 is too low. I think I feel like 100 is too much. I mean, so my first thought is just to kind of split the difference, like around 50. But as Commissioner Waddy said, I mean, we always can go back. But yeah. So, I mean, I don't know, I guess.
I feel like Eric too, but I really have trouble knowing what's right.
Yeah.
I really don't know what's right.
I don't have any
That's
sort
why
of
I lean
objective.
with Commissioner Waddy's suggestion. I don't, so I'm just going to go with what's
Strictly, yeah.
already there.
I will say I'm surprised for someone who has to enforce San Francisco zoning laws, how sort of, I don't know, willing you are to go against those standards. Just my experience with San Francisco has been the planning commissioners are very sort of hard line, like this is the rule, you must follow it.
I think it gets hard. So I deal with more the implementation side of these things. And so I think, for example, the fact that it's hard to identify some of these chains, you sometimes don't know they're a chain because
Yeah.
they're so small worldwide. that I see some of the issues with having such a low threshold. Like when we're talking about chains, you want things that any person walking down the street for the most part is going to be like, I know that's a chain. I mean, at least that's my feeling as it relates to this ordinance. I think that's what we're trying to get at. I think the San Francisco ordinance doesn't necessarily do that.
Yeah.
It's a little too low. I did have one other quick comment, and I don't know, just on the on 4B of your staff report, in the Solano district, the office requirements requiring a minor use permit for ground floor office uses. I don't know if there's sort of what my other commissioners feel on that, but I would be open to, in the Solano district, requiring more of a major use permit for ground floor office rather than a minor. And I think I've put it on the record before, but to me, sort of the ground floor office on Solano, I think kind of deadens the commercial corridor and sort of the pedestrian activation on Solano. Second stories or even ones that are, I think we have some of these sort of mid-block, you walk down a little driveway and there's a cottage sort of mid-block or something. That's less of a concern, but really the Solano, the street-facing tenant spaces along Solano at least, I would kind of want to hear on a case-by-case why it's appropriate at the location and, not to say we won't support them, but I think those require a little extra.
You're saying
Thought and consideration.
major use permit. I agree.
Well, I think, and right now, I think it's actually, I mean, I just have the ordinance in front of me, but it looks like it's being proposed as permitted in Solano.
There's a footnote,
23.
Yeah.
let me bring it up on the screen.
Oh, I see, minor use. Okay, there it is. I see, okay.
So just changing that to UP.
But it's, right now, it's P, right? It's not,
Permissive
like,
or-
currently it's permitted.
Right.
Yeah, that's.
So I guess my
interesting.
thought on this, with it being sort of an economic development strategy, is as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about sort of the activeness of Solano from an economic development perspective, and I think offices are a little counter to that
Does-
effort on the ground floor.
Just in your experience, does the same concern apply if it's like professional offices versus, if it's like a doctor or, optometrist's office or whatever versus like, someone just working at a desk job? Like, is it all kind of in the same category, or is there any?
I mean, in my opinion, I kind of clump them together. I think especially on Solano, where you're not getting heavy foot traffic for even the sort of doctor's office, chiropractor offices, real estate offices. You'd be lucky to see probably 2 or 3 people walk in an hour, kind of, if that. So yeah, I'd probably clump them together. But there may be, a really good argument that somebody makes when they're putting in a doctor's office that they have a certain demand or a certain clientele that makes it logical at a certain location or reuse. But
Kind of a clarification question. I think I agree with Commissioner Waddy, and I think we talked about this before about professional offices. Would a real estate office be considered an office under
Yes.
this?
yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I don't know if making the clarification, I agree, I think maybe it should be major use, but can we make a clarification for professional offices rather than just sort of, or is that adding a new category?
Well,
Well, but
there's-
like, for instance, like they just said, a real estate agency, which I wouldn't necessarily call an office.
So there are definitions of,
Yeah, I believe the definition actually includes both, so it would encompass medical and then, for example, an accountant or an insurance office.
Law office, yeah.
yeah, so in the draft ordinance, there's a distinction between offices general and offices professional. They have separate definitions, but they are grouped together in the use table.
Where are you in the definition?
I'm on page 20 of the red line ordinance.
Really?
I'll bring it up on the screen.
I guess my only concern about that is that, there seem to be a lot of storefronts on Solano that currently are professional office, and I think it's reasonable to assume that there will continue to be a demand for that, and maybe we want to try to move those uses somewhere else, but I don't know. it seems like that could be perceived as a major change from what's there now, and I get your point and I agree with it, but I'm not sure I see a need to make it a major use permit for like professional offices.
Does the
Just a
the
quick,
economic,
I was just going to ask a quick question. What is the process of, if somebody's going through a minor use permit, what is the criteria that's considered by staff in making that decision?
So we would review and act on it at a staff level. We still hold a public hearing, notify property owners within 300 feet. We have a supplemental form that we provide that business owner detailing hours of operation, number of employees, that kind of thing. But it's,
Would there be reasons for disapproval at a staff level typically, or is it typically just more to have the public?
I think it's more
Process.
generally to have the public engagement process. If we anticipated that there might be an issue, we would kick it up to the Planning and Zoning Commission and, put it in a more structured review setting.
Okay, thank you.
when the committee, what are they called, developed the economic strategic plan, did they discuss this? Did they discuss what the sort of the issue that might be going on, the trend away from retail and more toward professional or personal services and offices? Is there any sense that you gathered from that committee whether there is a concern about offices deadening the sidewalk?
Their concerns had extended less to office uses and more to personal services. I don't think that, I think they were kind of agnostic in regards to professional offices. I don't know if they have a preference one way or the other.
Part of the plan was identifying retail and restaurants as significant tax generators, personal services being less so, and
Less so.
obviously offices not providing that tax revenue.
I mean, I guess I just personally, I like the idea of making professional offices a major use permit, because, you see a lot of the law offices on Solano Avenue, and it's just sort of a wall with their signage, not very inviting or encouraging of that sort of retail walking atmosphere, versus offices general see more of like things we're trying to encourage, like real estate offices, banks, mortgage companies, where people come in and out of regularly and are more pedestrian friendly in terms of how they design their buildings.
I don't know if banks are pedestrian-friendly. Usually like a fort. But yeah, I would tend to think the market in some way would take care of itself because office is cheaper rental than retail. And the person who owns a building would want to get the maximum value out of it. But you're right, the law offices might be an anomaly to that. And the banks own the buildings usually, so.
So one thing we could do if you wanted to do that, there are two separate definitions for office professional and office general. Right now, they're collapsed in the use table, but they could be broken out and given different levels of review.
Just my thought I'm throwing out there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I was
I'm
kind
in
of
favor of
assuming the opposite, but that professional office might be more, that's just more like what I see there, and so I think of it as being an appropriate place for those kinds of uses, but to your point, maybe that is something we want to encourage to go elsewhere. I don't know. I don't feel strongly about this one.
Yeah, and it's not that I would be opposed to professional office, or it's just, forcing them to come in front of us rather than.
And where would dental fall in?
Real
So
estate
dental would be a
offices,
professional.
real estate offices draw a lot of foot traffic because everyone looks at the signs and what the home property values are, I think. It's interesting. The business that I think does no foot traffic at all, and the one that is must be a website development down there near, probably between Canes and Stanage, 123, something or other, 4. It's just an empty,
Yeah.
an empty space. I don't even know what kind of business they do there, but I think it's web development with a row of computers in there, and it has no sidewalk appeal at all. And then I think of, well, what about the orthodontist offices? They have a huge amount of business at a few hours a day. We have a lot of them. And they're probably appropriate. There's some kind of a personal services thing. We don't have many law offices, I don't think, maybe a couple. We have a couple of architects, or at least one in the Berkeley side of Woolman, is that architect there? And that space always looks pretty dead to me and not terribly interesting.
We're guilty now because our firm has a street space in Oakland and it's dead. But it's-
Killing
it
the
used to be a
sidewalk.
bank, and so the bank made this kind of fortress-like,
Yeah,
you took it over. But
Yeah,
the
yeah.
architecture is very much forbidding.
it's very forbidding, yeah. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a can of worms, actually.
Well, I think we should do I think we should be active and have the opportunity to be able to discuss the vitality of the sidewalk with respect to new applications. So based on that, I'm kind of inclined to say, yeah, we should have major use permits and planning and zoning involvement on some of these businesses or categories of businesses that might be, on the cusp of saying, are they appropriate or not? I think it's okay to have the rules say the Planning and Zoning Commission has to look at this.
So, and again, I just want to mention, and like I said, I don't feel strongly about this one, but we are talking about something a control that doesn't exist right now, and that we are creating anew. So again, I just want to be clear that we're not trying to, when we're talking about all these like bad things that could happen, like I don't think they're really happening right now without that control. So, but I mean, we do want to encourage more foot traffic and liven the street space. So, that may be valid. And then if people complain about how difficult it is to, the cost and time that it takes to get a new orthodontist office sited on Solano, I guess that it's also potentially something that falls in the category of we can revisit it later depending on what happens. But I guess just to change this subject a little bit, I just wanted to thank you for all the hard work on this. And I know there have been a lot of meetings and discussions around all these issues, and every time it comes back, something new comes up. And I wanted to compliment you on a job really well done. And I think that, what's in front of us now, although, there may be some disagreement, there may not be complete consensus on every single item. I think this really does reflect a lot of input that we've all provided over the last several months, and I strongly support moving it forward.
I have one question on complaints. Again, it's a lot of work here, and I don't want to keep bringing up new stuff, but under the 2020-160 gyms and health clubs, which isn't in the staff report, but it's redlined here, so why was it redlined in the actual code ordinance, but not called out? But anyway, under there, it has SPC and CMX districts, hours of operation from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Beyond those hours shall be subject to major use permit. And the CMX district is really way out. It's the one that's be more permissible, and yet we're controlling the hours tighter than we do on the Solano, the SC district. It seemed odd to me.
It's an hour later.
It's an hour later.
6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And if you go to,
SC
let's say it is 8 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Wait,
Business hours on
you're
alcohol.
looking at alcoholic beverages.
Right, so we let them serve alcoholic beverages to 11, but we won't let the business be open until past 10. It doesn't serve alcoholic beverages.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're comparing across two different use types in the CMX rather
But
than,
it seems odd that a gym, we make
Yeah.
them close at 10.
Okay.
So if they're out drinking, that's fine to stay up late, but if they're exercising, they can't.
Gets rowdy when you're exercising.
yeah, I mean, maybe it would be appropriate. And I know we did get one comment about the hours in the SPC district. Maybe it's appropriate to say that hours of operation in the SC and SPC would be 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And then just not have hours restrictions on CMX.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I think so too.
So,
Well, no, so what did you,
what did we have for restaurants, Chris? 10?
yeah, no, to 11 o'clock to restaurants. And we had 10 for the gym. So in the CMS district, we're suggesting taking off the limit of the time, but keeping it as is in the restaurant.
I don't have a problem with the restaurant.
Yeah, I don't either. I
Use.
think leaving it the way it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd support that.
Any more comments?
Do you need a sort of definitive answer from us in terms of the major use permit for offices and anything else, or? I know we've kind of talked about, but we haven't given you any conclusive.
So on that particular issue, this is going to ideally come back to you 2 weeks from tonight. So if you provide us specificity on that, we can have that change incorporated into the draft that we'll be bringing back to you.
Okay. I don't know.
I mean, I'll just put my clear perspective out there. I'd be supportive of a major use permit for both general office and the professional. So I don't know if there's two others who have the same
Okay.
perspective, but I'm very impressed by how quickly these things get to commission. I always see the 21 days to commission, so it's not that big of a,
Yeah, it's not that big a hurdle, is it?
I'm sure.
kudos to you guys.
I mean, I'll follow it up with, I guess I would support a major use permit just for professional offices so that we can encourage hopefully more of the sort of walk-in offices like real estate and whatever they listed under the definitions.
I'm happy to compromise with that if that gets us there.
I would be more inclined to support that than a full across the board major use permit.
Yeah, stay within the
And as,
goal of the project here, which is to make it
Yeah.
easier, yeah.
and as you said, we can always revise it too in the future if we need to.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? So major use permit for
For
professional office?
professional offices, and so I guess that would require, as you said, the sort of the breakout of general offices versus professional offices.
And general would be permitted.
Yeah. And so then the permitted offices would include things.
So, what would
Is
be a
it
title
permitted or is it minor use permit?
Minor.
Sorry, minor
On
use.
the ground.
Yeah, I don't know about, what would a title company be? They're pretty dead. Probably be a
There,
general office.
that would be general offices. In terms of the definition, the examples they give are companies dealing in trusts, mortgages, or investments, real estate businesses, including brokers, appraisers, or property managers, or office operations that provide products or services to the public in a manner similar to retail sales.
That'd be a general office, see?
Yeah. Like a travel agency or insurance business.
Yeah, well, I
Be
think
under
we should-
general.
I think the planning commission should have a chance to review those, and yeah.
Make a big difference, I think so too. It's, you know, all those, even if you don't have a lot of people coming in and out, you could make your front of your office look, add to the.
You can make it
rate
look, yeah,
without
yeah,
too much
yeah.
difficulty.
Now, and just, I'm thinking ahead, I'm wondering why all of these banks are keeping all their bank buildings. When's the tipping point going to come when ATMs are going to be such that, and mobile banking is going to be such that the banks are going to say, we don't need all these buildings? And I haven't seen that happen yet, except once, and that is on, Wells Fargo did abandon their branch bank on University right across from Zellerbach. That I think it was, I think that's the one they did. So I did see that, and they got rid of the branch bank and just left 4 ATMs there. And another business went into that space. They leased out that space or sold it. But, I look at the California Trust and Bank or the B of A building, and I say, wow, that's a lot of expensive land they're sitting on. And when are they going to capitalize on that? I've talked to Mechanics Bank about, why don't you build housing on your site? And, I've tried to, that's one of our target sites in the housing element. I've talked to the manager about it. Well, he doesn't want to, it has to be higher than him because he doesn't want to lose his job for a couple of years, I don't think. But still,
Does this
I don't know.
relate
I
to a
don't know where that all fits
particular?
in this, but I'm just wondering if that isn't something we're going to see, and I don't know how that's going to affect Solano or San Pablo. I don't know.
I mean, well, just to, as Commissioner Waddy said, it sounds like we have at least a majority of 3 commissioners who are in favor of a major use permit for offices, both general and professional. And so, I mean, if that's the majority, then, I mean, I'll.
And just one other thing to point out, these uses are actually permitted by right on San Pablo. So if a prospective business came in, they didn't want to go through the use permit process, they could re-tailor their efforts to look for space on San Pablo to have a use by right.
And so we shouldn't have this footnote 23 requiring a major use permit on San Pablo. That may be an error in the report. I guess I should clarify. So should we continue to have office as a permitted use on San Pablo, regardless of ground floor or upper story?
I would say
I'd be
that'd
fine
be
with
right,
that.
because it's a coarser kind of.
Yeah,
process.
I think if we're making it harder on Solano, then that should be the
Yeah.
compromise.
I think I understand. I think I'm okay with that. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, well, we got one done.
Is everybody comfortable with the change of use exemption, except me? Am I the only one who's uncomfortable with that?
I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, in general, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I'm comfortable with it.
You're referring to the parking exemption for changes of use?
Pardon?
The parking exemption for
Yeah.
changes of use?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
To me, that was
So let me think. So what would that exemption mean? Yeah, that would be an exemption for, change of use would be exempt from having to have a modification of parking.
Right, and just to,
So we're using, now how would it work with the blended number of 400? How does that all work then?
So in terms of a change in use, the blended ratio becomes moot for that purpose. If you're changing a use, then you wouldn't need to provide additional parking no matter what the standard was. So the blended ratio in this case is only going to apply for a new tenant or new construction.
Right.
correct me if I'm wrong, it would apply if they went over the 2,000 square foot.
Yes, that also, thank you.
So if
Yeah,
there's a change
yeah.
of use and it was,
And the square footage of the business is more than 2,000.
yeah.
Right. And that was a, no, that was a
Here we are.
change last time we spoke.
Okay, here we are.
and actually just one other thing to perhaps give you a little more comfort. The last applications that we've looked at in terms of parking surveys, under these draft regulations would now be subject to a major use permit. So there would still be some review and discretion by the Planning and Zoning Commission, only you would have the purview to look at the operating conditions. So, for example, there was an optometrist's office that relocated to Lower Solano Avenue. We did a parking survey, took that before the commission. Under these new regulations, the parking would be a non-issue, but you would be looking at a use permit for operations. So you would still have some discretion and opportunity to comment on
Yeah,
the use.
Okay. Can you summarize what we discussed? You wrote this?
So in terms of gyms, we're going to regulate hours in the SC and SPC districts from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., and we're not going to regulate hours of operation for gyms in the CMX district.
Right.
In terms of the land use tables, we're going to split out the office categories. So a general office in the SC district is going to require a minor use permit if it's proposed on the ground floor. And the office professional category would require a major use permit if it's proposed on the ground floor.
So, and I'll just, I think it sounded like there were 3 commissioners who wanted to make both general and professional require a major use permit,
Okay.
Ground floor.
rather than what you just said.
Okay. So I think we're going to keep it how it was proposed
Yeah.
on paper in the ordinance. Okay, so striking that. And then in terms of the chain stores, I'm actually not sure where we ended up. Are we going to keep it at 100 as proposed, or there was some temperature for maybe a midpoint around 50?
Like, I guess, could we just take a straw poll on who at this moment would be willing to support putting the threshold at 100? Okay. I mean, if you have, if there's a
No,
specific number that's lower than that,
No.
again, I'm just,
No, I don't have any objective reasoning to,
yeah, I don't, I mean,
to
I will admit that I don't, 100 seem, it's, you know, it's a nice round number, but,
Yeah. 67.3. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so then the modification to the draft ordinance would be for the hours of gym operations. And then there was a footnote in the staff report about the definitions. You may recall we're adding a couple new definitions for custom manufacturing, food preparation. And those we put in the definitions section of the ordinance. They actually belong in the commercial use classification section, but based on the way we noticed the meeting, that's not where they ended up in this ordinance. So you can find the list of commercial use classifications in here, and next time we bring it back, we would have shifted those definitions to that more
Oh,
appropriate
they would go in the
location.
other, okay, yeah. That is a little confusing, I have to admit, but, yeah, okay. I had no problem with the definitions, the wording of the definitions. Did anyone else? They were
Well,
fine.
the definition on the tutoring and lessons, I just looked like there could be a lot of loopholes in there, but maybe the word academic fixes it. You know, if you're doing lessons, lessons in, what kind, there's all kinds of, you can learn how to lift weights or something, I mean, it's not necessarily what we're envisioning. I don't know if that kind of locks it in. So maybe that, it just seemed like a very narrow definition. Maybe it's fine, because I don't know. So this tutoring lessons is referring to a use group that has less parking requirements than it might be if it were restaurant. But if you did cooking classes there, then it kind
So the tutoring services are specific to basically youth-oriented tutoring. So for example, we have Mathnasium on Lower Solano and a Kumon Learning Center on San Pablo. That would fall specifically within a tutoring center. If it's services instructional, that gets more into what you've just identified. If it was culinary or something else that was sort of non-youth academic focused.
okay.
What about a foreign language school? Like,
Are kids going to it?
pardon?
Then that would fall under tutoring.
Well, then maybe that youth should be added to this, then. It's not in there.
We can modify that to make sure it's youth-oriented.
Okay.
That's it.
And on the food and beverage preparation and the custom manufacturing, I was thinking of the application we had for the large food truck catering service. Well, where would that fit in here?
Oh, yeah.
CMX.
It's because it's in the CMX, that's coming back to you. And another spoiler alert, you're going to be looking at that again in 2 weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
This time, are they going to like park one of the trucks outside and waft the barbecue smell in?
Maybe if they offer free food too.
All right, so that's it. You've read all the comments? So you'll take that back, make adjustments, we'll see it in 2 weeks.
Yeah, but we need you to make basically two motions at the conclusion. One is to adopt the resolution of intention, which is 2018-04. That's just a procedural step within our zoning code. And then the next motion would be to continue it to a date certain of November 28th.
I will move to adopt the resolution of intention to amend the zoning code. Do I need to be more specific than that?
With our
With the changes discussed this evening, but yeah. The resolution of intention doesn't get
Oh,
into
yeah.
that detail, right?
True, true.
Okay.
Second?
Do we have to, with that, are we going to do two different motions?
Two different
Okay, all
motions.
right. Any seconds on that? Any second? All in favor, say aye.
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 I think I'm saying, why are we adopting the resolution of intention now without the noticing, without the hearing?
No. So what happened is this. We have a provision in the code that any amendment to Chapter 20 requires that the commission do a formal resolution of intention, and that just captures the big picture, whereas is. We did run the newspaper notice in the West County Times for tonight's hearing, and so because we've already noticed it pursuant to Government Code Section 65090, it can be continued to a date certain. And so we're still in compliance with the
Oh,
state
I see.
notification
I
requirements.
see, okay, thank you. All right. Then, do we vote?
We voted, but
No, we need to-
Now I understand, I'll vote aye then.
Yeah, and
Need
the
to make a motion
resolution,
to continue to November 21st,
28th.
28th. Okay, I'll make that
we'll
motion.
need, you will?
Sure, make a motion to move this item to November 28th.
Second?
Okay.
I'll second it, or,
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you, it passed. Next item on the agenda. All these papers, pull it out here.
Okay. Oh, yeah. This, okay.
Proposed zoning code amendment to section 2040-020, site regulations by district residential.
We're going to play some musical chairs here quickly, but just to give you a big picture snapshot, you had an application earlier this fall where there was some concern over the horizontal extension of nonconforming walls and how that language is currently phrased within the zoning code. And so you asked that that come back to you fairly quickly, so you adopted a resolution of intention at the last meeting. Now, for your review this evening is the actual discussion with the red line changes.
Good evening, Commission. Once again, this is the proposed code amendments to Section 2024-020, site regulations by district residential. And so this may also be a little repetitive from the staff report from last time, but this time we can take Commission input at the end. So some background, the zoning code was comprehensively updated and adopted by the City Council in 2004. The zoning code occasionally requires amendments as part of a broader policy implementation per the housing element and general plan, and consistency with state laws or just general clarification. Recent review of a residential remodel application has highlighted areas of the zoning code which require refining. On September 26, 2018, the Commission directed staff to return with draft changes to Section 2024-020 of the Albany Municipal Code to clearly define policies involving horizontal extensions to nonconforming walls, both vertical extensions of nonconforming walls and the front walls and side and rear walls as well. As included in the staff report is the existing language of the Table 2A, 19A and B. And then this was the proposed language also included in the staff report showing the red line changes. And then one thing to note, which I'll mention on the next slide, is the highlighted portion, which I also mentioned in the staff report, just seeing some recommendation or suggestions for this portion of the code provision.
And just for clarity purposes, as you may remember, the existing language kind of lumps all of these non-conforming walls. We've structured it so that the vertical extension is its own letter, and then the side and rear yard walls are their own, separately defined. So this gives a little more specificity. And obviously, you'll have an opportunity to direct us to make changes as you see appropriate.
Analysis. Recent review of a residential application has hinged upon the interpretation of this specific code section. Specifically, the one that triggered it was 1060 Evelyn at the last meeting, which included, or involved rather, a horizontal extension of an existing non-conforming sidewall. And then another relatively recent one that was approved earlier this year was 1040 Q route, which involved a horizontal extension of existing non-conforming front wall. The red line code changes refine and add additional language to the code section to provide clearer direction to applicants proposing additions to existing homes. Staff has requested specific feedback on the aforementioned highlighted portion of the code. The code amendments are exempt from CEQA pursuant to section 1506B3. And staff recommendation, the Planning and Zoning Commission review and the proposed code changes and adopt the Planning and Zoning Commission Resolution 2018-05, forwarding a recommendation to City Council to amend sections 2024-020, site regulations by district residential. The Commission is free to recommend further refinement to the proposed code language. Thank you.
Any comments of staff?
Sure. I had a couple of questions to start our questions and comments. And I'm thinking about this a lot in terms of my own house, because my own house has a non-conforming side setback, and it has a weird notch with a stair in it. So and a weird cantilever. So I'm thinking if you had a stair that went up right along the property line, that's clearly not within the setback, how would that be treated in terms of vertical extension? Would that just be prohibited from being infilled? Would that be treated as if there's a wall there because there's a stair railing there?
So the stairs are not currently enclosed?
Right.
Oh.
This code provision pertains to walls, right? Not
Yeah.
exterior.
But if you were to convert that, like if you were wanting to fill in where the stair is.
So I'm just trying to visualize for our
Yeah.
discussion. You have a non-conforming wall.
Yeah.
If you extended
then
it
it keeps going to stair,
horizontally,
yeah.
that would allow you to have the stairs enclosed.
Exactly.
So I think under what's proposed, you could do that.
Okay.
Because you would have a use permit to extend the wall horizontally.
So how I'm reading this, the extending it horizontally is not permitted,
Right,
so you
okay,
can't
sorry.
even get a use permit.
Right.
Just curious, where did the stairs lead to?
The backyard. So like you leave the back door and then there's a stair. So there's kind of like a knot. My house is like a notch, and in the notch is the stair to get out from the kitchen to the backyard. Not that we need to design this, but I'm trying to think of like real world implications of like what this means, you know?
It seems like that condition might be that one that you're talking about where you're afraid it might, not that you would do this, but that where you're afraid it might get exploited in terms of the foundation is underneath those
Right.
stairs.
This is why Chris highlighted
then there is no-
Well, and like, I don't think there is a
That's-
foundation under stairs, right? I mean, it's an
Oh.
old funky house. But these are the scenarios where like sometimes I hate saying things are prohibited rather than
Yeah.
on a case-by-case basis being able to have us analyze them. You know, like thinking about this, like, would we be okay filling that in? Maybe you wouldn't want to go further than the back wall of the house, but this weird little notch that already has a stair in it, there's always already volume, there's already, I don't know. I kind of
Yeah.
wonder about things like that to at least allow a use permit. And then I had two other questions on this, and that in A for vertical, where it says in a vertical plane over an existing wall or foundation. I'm also wondering whether it should clarify, say over or under. And I don't know if that's contemplated, because again, I think about my house. I have a cantilevered room that's non-complying within the front and the side setback.
Oh, right.
And if you ever wanted to infill that seems like a
Yeah.
reasonable thing. You could put a fence there anyhow, probably. And so if that's something we would want to have happen, we might want to think about the language saying over or under. And then my last question is at the the sort of intro to it under where it just says 19. Sorry, I'm working from the bottom up. I don't know why. It says exceptions may be made in the case of a second-story addition to a single-family dwelling. And I guess I'm just wondering, does this not apply if it's a first-story addition, or if it happens to be like a third-story addition, or to a two-family home? Like, how do the controls work if it's not exactly a second story and not exactly a one-family home? Or are there different regulations elsewhere that deal with those circumstances?
This would apply across the board, whether it's a duplex or a single-family home. We're actually, I'm sorry,
Where?
So under notes, it says notes table 2.A continued under Exhibit A. And then it says 19.
Yeah.
I'm on the red line changes, I think.
Oh, exceptions. I
Second story
see.
and
It's
single
it's in the intro part.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, so really it should just say in the case of an addition.
Right, in addition to a residential structure or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, in general, I also, I get concerned about making it seem like things are prohibited and there are no exceptions. I think the case that was here, last month that led to this whole discussion was a good example of the kind of case where we might want to make an exception because requiring, strict compliance with the setback would have resulted in a design that was, materially more expensive, strange looking, and not really benefiting anyone, in my opinion. And so I think my biggest comment on this, and I'm fine with the overall intent or what I understand the intent to be, but I think there are always exceptions. Like there are always the weird cases that we haven't thought about and places where it may actually be better in everyone's interest to allow extension of a horizontal extension of a non-conforming wall as well. And so I want to make sure that we're at least acknowledging, or if others agree, of course, that we're acknowledging that there may be exceptions that are reviewed on a case-by-case basis. And I don't know if it's appropriate to do that through a use permit or through a variance or whatever it is, but I do think there needs to be some kind of escape hatch, and we should call out that fact.
yeah. I think what we can do under this proposed provision C, we can eliminate prohibition from there and kind of similar to the vertical extension, basically require a use permit for a horizontal extension to be evaluated by the commission on a case-by-case basis.
That's great.
I would be fine with that. And just before I wrap up, two other minor comments on, one of them is just on C and one is on B and C. So I do think we should strike where it says shall strictly conform to setback standards. I think we should strike strictly only because I think that it calls into question, like every other place that you say that something should conform, like why aren't we saying everything should strictly conform? Like, it's almost like we're emphasizing it too much. So I would just say it shall conform. And then the other thing is, I think the language in both B and C saying that the extension shall not further encroach or prohibited from further encroachments. I think I understand what the intent is there, but the language could be a little bit open to interpretation. So I actually liked the parenthetical that was in B before, where it said i.e., I think it should be EG, but a non-conforming wall which encroaches 1 foot into a required setback shall not be permitted to encroach 2 feet. So I would suggest either putting that language back in as an example to illustrate what you're talking about, or say something like, the extension shall not increase the degree of encroachment, or something that just clarifies what exactly we mean by increasing the encroachment.
I agree with Commissioner Wadi's sort of last comment about clarifying Part B. I will say, I differ from Commissioner Wadi's first comments in that I am in favor of prohibition because I feel like that gives applicants a clear direction rather than leaving it open where it's like now it's basically just saying the same as we have now. Like, basically, if you want to challenge it, then just bring it forward rather than saying, no, this is the rule. And I personally, as an architect, feel like when we get cases like that one where they had the horizontal exception, I hate to use this word, but I feel like it's, I don't want to say lazy, but I feel like design professionals, if they know what the rules are, then they should be able to work with those rules and design it so that that isn't an issue, so that they could have designed the addition differently so that it wasn't about that horizontal projection of 2 inches or 4 inches. They could have done a different design from the get-go knowing that they couldn't do that. And so as an architect, I feel like it's putting it on the design professionals to put a little more effort into their design work rather than just saying, well, it'd be really easy just to extend this wall straight back and make my life a lot simpler. Like, well, you know what? You got to like kind of think about the design more and put a little more effort into figuring out how to work within the rules.
So
I guess my only,
please
I was
go
gonna say,
ahead.
I guess my only counter to that is again, like thinking back to my property and that, like in Albany, we have so many properties that predate any zoning controls that we just do have a lot of funky situations. Like my house was one of 3 originally developed in one large parcel together, and they subdivided it with no side setback along my property. And so it created some really unusual situations. Like my neighbor on one side is completely non-conforming, located entirely in the rear yard, and the other, so there's some, I think they talked to you. So there's just some funkiness in this part of the block because, the house was built in 1915 and there's just funky things going on. And I think, to be able to do some really small alterations to homes and to improve the livability. I agree with you. If somebody's doing a really major renovation where you're gutting the house, I think you can work around these things. But if I were to do a kitchen remodel, like I'm thinking, those types of somewhat smaller things, I think sometimes being able to make a case where your neighbors are in support of it, it's a good design. I do feel like we've got a lot of old random housing stock here that sometimes the current rules just don't always make sense for that environment. I don't know.
Which
My 2 cents.
I mean, I kind of agree with you. I guess for me, it's like, where do you draw the line? Because I think that one project with the horizontal projection, I would consider that a major renovation. Because if I remember correctly, they were doing like a 2-story addition to the back, and it's like you're pouring new foundations. Like at a certain level, like, come on, you can deal with this in the design aspect of it rather than wait till it's all been designed and be like, whoa, we didn't realize, we had to make this change. And I'm like, come on, you're designing a 2-story addition to the back of a house. If it's like a interior renovation or they're adding maybe 5 feet to a single story, okay, I'd consider that a minor sort of renovation. But I think the scope of the projects that we've seen where we've approved this, to me, I would characterize that as more of a major renovation.
But I think there's also that's one kind of dimension of it, but it's also like, if you have a bright line rule that you can never have exceptions, then we're dealing with like a 100% encroachment the same way we're dealing with a 1-inch encroachment. And I just don't think that's I don't think that's a good way to, do we really want people, yes, the architect could have set back that wall 3 inches in order to but I just don't understand what we're getting out of
I guess
that.
my point is that it doesn't have to be about 3 inches. They could have designed it completely differently, so that wouldn't have even been an issue.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I don't know. I can't imagine ever sitting here and say, in any aspect of the code saying this is the law, the rule, and there should never be any exceptions. I just don't think. It just seems strange to me.
I mean, I kind of, sorry if I'm interrupting. I kind of get where you're coming from. I guess when I look at a project and I have to design a project, the first thing you do is you go to the planning and zoning codes and you figure out what are your parameters, and if it says a setback has to be 5 feet, you say, okay, we got to work within that envelope. And to say, well, maybe we can just get them to nudge that rule a little bit so we can have this wall extend, to me, that I don't know, it doesn't seem,
So question for you in terms of whether this would be a change in terms of thinking about maybe like findings that could be incorporated. To me, the major difference is when you're continuing an existing sidewall. Like, to me, I have a harder time saying that it's unreasonable to continue that plane when somebody's doing a horizontal addition. I completely agree if you're wanting to, laterally encroach in off of your existing sidewall, but when you've got a sidewall of a house and you just want to do, pop back that bedroom 5 feet without having to do notching, that's to me where it seems like a more reasonable situation for somebody to deviate if you have that existing non-complying wall. In the same way that you go up if you wanted to just go back to extend and add a closet in a bedroom. To me, those are very analogous and almost at times less impactful to do a little farther back on the same wall rather than going up in the same way. So like, I would be fine if we allowed it to have one of the criteria, be that this is, we're supporting it because it's an extension, in the same plane as an existing non-conforming wall or something like that. So that we're clear about this isn't, we're kind of don't want to consider instances where people are truly creating a totally new impact in a side yard.
So we can distinguish that, and we're kind of wordsmithing it on the fly here, but allowing the horizontal extension in the same plane, because we have actually seen plans come across the counter where somebody has a non-conforming wall, and then rather than, let's say it's on the property line, rather than going to 3 feet, they want to go to like 2 feet, 6 inches, and that doesn't work. Kind of an all or nothing thing, which is, effectively how our, setbacks are written. It's a minimum of 3 feet, maximum of 5 feet. You don't have, the in-betweens are going to be dependent upon the lot width.
It seems like this can be really simplified. And it probably bothers you because we end up being a little bit more generous. But if we just went with item B, we took off the word front walls, and we just said existing non-conforming walls which encroach into the required setback areas may be extended in a vertical and/or horizontal plane, subject to design review by the Planning and Zoning Commission and obtaining a use permit. And then you could have the last sentence too. And that covers all the walls. I'm not sure why we're separating them into all these different categories.
Yeah, policy-wise, I would support that.
So for wordsmithing purposes, do you want us to be specific side, rear, and front walls, or just other
I don't, it
walls?
seems like
I
it
think-
just repeats itself. I don't see it.
Well, we've called out, I guess, the vertical extension in A. So if it's going to pertain to the side, rear, and front walls, how do we want to characterize that? Do we want to be specific?
Well, going back to our original conversation from that previous project, what I at least gathered is there was a lack of uncertainty of what the rules were actually meaning.
Yeah.
And so, part of this, I think, is what are the rules meaning? Or is this our opportunity to slightly change the rules to align with what policy objectives we want? And if it's the latter, where we kind of are able to open this up, then I think we probably first need to figure out what we want, and then we can craft the language from there. Because if the policy is what it is, then I, agree to your point that
and that's kind of where I think initially why the auspice that I was thinking we were going to review this was just to clarify what the
existing
original
policy,
intent meant, rather than taking this opportunity to kind of refine the.
I think.
Right, but I think we
in
have
Albany,
disagreement
need-
about what the original intent was too, and that's part of the issue, and that's why, so I don't think there's a way we can just like neatly say we're only clarifying, not changing anything, because there's no agreement on what it is that we're clarifying. But I think we all agree that it's beneficial for it to be clear, and this is an opportunity to decide what that means. But I guess I just, if we are going to distinguish between, vertical or horizontal extensions, and if we are going to distinguish between front, side, and rear setbacks, I guess I just want there to be like a reason for it. And right now, it just seems, it feels a little arbitrary, and there may be good reasons to distinguish between the different types, of how we treat the different types of walls, but it's not clear to me what those reasons are.
So I would be supportive of Chair Kent's proposal of just basically going with subsection B, taking off the word front, and just saying non-conforming walls which encroach into the required setback may be extended in a vertical or horizontal plane, subject to, the rest of that sentence, subject to a use permit and design review and all of that.
I don't think so, no. I
You don't-
Sure, she does.
I really think that we need to look at side yards. And I think in Albany, we have thousands of homes that have very narrow side yards. And I've always looked at those much more carefully than the side yard setbacks than I have the front yards and certainly the rear yards. The rear yards, we rarely have anything close to 20 feet, encroachment in the rear yard. And on front yards, I tend to look at, maybe you can go vertical even though it's encroaching, depending on the design review criteria and what's going on there, what do you see? But I think that we have the homes so close to each other that I've always felt that those side yard setbacks were something we really needed to take a close look at. And I would say I don't object to the words prohibited and strictly enforced with respect to the side yards. I voted against the one project, even though it was only a three-inch jog, for that reason. That was an extreme situation, but we've had many projects come through here. We had one on the consent calendar the last meeting that jogged back in order to meet the side yard setback with their addition. And we had many projects like that, including the ones on the 25-foot wide lots that were the McGregor properties. And we had them jog back, and it made for very small bedrooms and very narrow interior spaces for that. But we didn't allow the horizontal extension in the side yard. And I just think that is what has been historically done. That's the way the code has been enforced in the past. And I'm in favor of continuing that as much as possible. I had trouble understanding that. I think the applicant on that one project did a very good job of pointing out the inconsistencies in our wording. I think I had a little trouble following him exactly, but I think he made a good point. And that's what we're here to clarify. And I thought staff did a pretty good job of it.
But we're not
Anyway, I
making it
support
any
it.
easier.
Pardon me?
It still has to come before us to make that decision either way. I mean, the way it
Yes.
is now, it comes before us and we have to make, the way, okay, you're saying that it was worded in such a way, even though it was vaguely worded, that it prohibited making horizontal extension of non-conforming walls. And what we're proposing is that
Well, if they do not conform to existing setback standards, then they shall be prohibited from further encroachment into the side yard, into the required setback areas. That's for side and rear yard. I don't have a problem with that.
we allow it to go straight up.
Yeah.
Allow it up, but we don't allow it sideways. And what would be the difference?
Build within the building envelope when you're doing additions, and especially, for me, especially on the side yard.
So why is the vertical okay and not the horizontal? Why is the vertical
Why is
okay
the
and not
vertical
the
okay?
horizontal?
Because, well, I suppose, yeah, it's a good point. Because I think that you're not narrowing that very narrow setback. I guess you are narrowing it on up high, but I'm thinking of the walkability of it, ability to get in and out of the garbage can, garbage cans in.
Yeah, but we go back to
Having
that
that
issue
passage, that's
that issue
a
too.
passageway and project after project.
That issue that, a month ago, whatever it was just a couple inches. I mean, that's not going to affect any of those things you just mentioned.
Well, I know that's true, and I thought that was an extreme situation, one that we haven't seen very well, and I don't have an objection with the final result. I think
Yeah, but
for the applicant, the final result was okay with me.
if it was a foot, I
But-
think this board would have voted differently.
Right.
But we voted because it was just 2 inches,
Yeah.
2.5, whatever it was. And I think it falls down on the board to,
We do have rules, and this is an area where I think we need to have at least strong rules and be pretty clear about it so that we don't have other applicants coming in and try to chip away on those side yards, especially the side yard setbacks.
I guess,
Well, and I think that if, an applicant, I mean, there would still be a use permit requirement. So if you want to avoid getting a use permit, then you don't extend your encroachment, right? So like, to the extent that sorry, I'm tired, I'm not very coherent right now. To the extent that the use permit process is supposed to be a deterrent in some way to encourage people to do the thing that's easier.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of architects will still just design, they would, a good architect would say, well, you could do this, but you'd have to go through this expensive, relatively expensive approval process, and wouldn't it be better to just design it to not extend the encroachment?
Yeah.
But if, under these circumstances, I think that's what this whole use permit, or it could even potentially be a variance for this kind of thing, but that's what this is supposed to be about, is like, under these circumstances, maybe it would be a better project and it would be worth it to go and ask for approval to do X, Y, Z. And so, anyway, I've said my piece.
I guess my position is that it's like we said when that last project came up. We don't have any objective type of matrix to judge these things. So whether it be 2 inches or 2 feet, how are we to differentiate when they bring it to us case by case? And is it just going to us being like, well, I think 2 feet is too much, but 1'8" is okay. And so
But isn't
again,
that
that's
the
where
case for any use permit? I mean, we almost never, we have findings we have to make, but there are no objective criteria for most of these things.
yeah, I know, and that's part of my issue. That's why I don't like it.
I see.
I have a question on this. Why isn't this a variance? Like in San Francisco, this would be a variance issue if you're encroaching into a setback. When do we use variances?
So variances typically apply when there's a unique circumstance with the property. So for example, the project on Key Route, that was actually approved with a variance because that is it's a 60 by 40 or
It's-
60
yeah.
by 45
The
lot?
lot is
It
wider.
didn't, it was wider than it was deep. It had,
60-foot front yard.
it had a 60 feet of frontage by like 45 feet of depth. So there was no way to achieve the standard setbacks.
Okay.
So we could make the hardship findings. On the other one on Evelyn, that was a standard, I think it's a 37 and a half by 100-foot depth lot. So there isn't really a unique circumstance. That's a pretty common lot size in
We
town.
do. We do variances. We do. We have done a fair, and it usually has to do with a really odd-shaped lot. Or one of them had a sewer running right through the middle of that's one of the, I would also had a variance for that.
And just kind of getting back to my original comment is that I agree with what Commissioner Donaldson said in terms of the front and your rear yard. I feel like that we hardly ever, I think maybe once in my several years doing this, have we had a project that's asked for that, and that was a rear yard. So I think I'm more focused on the side yards. And for me, going back to your comment about what's the intention of these or what are we trying to clarify, for me, setbacks originate from a life, health, and safety requirement. And so we're requiring the setbacks so that there's a fire gap between buildings. And here in Albany, we have so many homes that are either 0 lot lines or really close to each other. And so that's, for me, is just sort of holding that as sacrosanct. Like, we have the setbacks. They're originally, even though some of these things might have been developed before these were done, at some point, the country as a whole basically decided setbacks were a good idea to help prevent fires from spreading, and so that's why we have them. And so that's why I like to try to hold these things as sort of sacrosanct and not allow these sort of little nudges into it. And then I also think back anecdotally when David Arkin, who is also an architect, was sitting on here for his last commission meeting. Somebody had a parking where it was a side yard parking, and in the back it expanded out so they could fit 2 cars. And then the addition basically at the back of it cut into that parking by like about 6 inches for about 1.5 foot of that parking space, one of the parking spaces. And David Arkin was, as historically I think the commission's been, was like, you know what, that cuts into that parking space, which is required that you have to have. We're not going to give an exception for that. You need to pull in that addition wall by whatever is required to make that clear. And they did it, and that's why I think it's just kind of the way it has been, and I feel like there's good reasons for it. So that's why I'm for keeping it more sort of hard line. Or I'll stop now.
And I don't want to keep going back and forth about this. I don't think a use permit would ever get approved if there was no egress for people to escape in the case of a fire. And I think fire codes exist for a reason. So your point is well taken, but I don't think what we're really talking about here is creating like a slum-like condition.
No.
And so,
Yeah. There's
Anyway.
also life too. Like my condo is, the neighboring building is a single family directly on the lot line. And so my windows look out to their wall that's about 4 feet from my window.
and that
It's
would
like-
still be the case if they went vertical.
I know, and that's why I wouldn't,
like,
that's why I
why-
wouldn't like to, that's
I
why I
just-
would like to prohibit
I just
it.
think that I think that all of these distinctions are not very reasoned. But anyway,
disagree with that.
I guess I just have one question for you, which is, like, in the case of, like, if we adopted this as it's worded here, is there anything prohibiting someone who does have a very funky lot and a very unusual circumstance from coming forward and requesting a variance?
No. They would be completely allowed to do that.
Okay. So that's always in the background, even if it's
Exactly.
not stated. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, your comments on the vertical extension are very interesting and in a way thought-provoking, because we've always allowed the homes, second-story additions have been allowed. I mean, that's the way people expand their homes in Albany, and I can't think of times where we've had any discussion about not allowing a second-story addition that is really, that's within this, that's right on the, that's a vertical
McGregor,
extension
didn't we do that on
of a
McGregor?
setback, yeah.
Set it back?
Right, this
They,
within the setback.
they did that voluntarily.
We did.
They did, yeah, because the wall was going to go on the property line. They were not in a good position with their next-door neighbor. That was ultimately appealed to city council, so they voluntarily moved it back to a 3-foot setback.
Should we continue this to think about it more, or just push it forward, or?
It's up to the commission. We, just kind of based on the discussion thus far, we've taken out the proposed provision C and simply modified B to be specific to horizontal extension of non-conforming walls. As we've written it, this would allow the encroachment into the setback areas subject to Planning and Zoning Commission review and obtaining a use permit.
I'm sorry, say again?
This, as it's crafted right now, would allow the extension of a horizontal non-conforming wall to be extended with a use permit.
The way it's crafted originally, what do you mean right now?
They
Well, you
tweaked
edited
it.
it.
We've been wordsmithing it as the conversation has proceeded.
I think they picked up your kind of comment about B and got rid of
My
C.
comment was to get everything out except B. And edit B down. But yeah, that's pretty,
What is this now?
all right, yeah, okay. I'm all right with that. Anyone want to? You don't.
I mean, I don't think we'll have consensus, but why don't we give it a go? I mean, I'll make a motion to approve as revised, this ordinance, or do we, what do we?
Yeah, and actually, one other thing, because you raised the issue, and this has actually come up, under the vertical extension, we've also included under, because we have had that happen where there is a projecting bay, and it can't go to the ground because it encroaches into the setback area. Under this, it would be able to go to the ground.
And you're okay with that, your comment about the highlighted word or foundation versus something like, you know, a wall that directly bears on a existing foundation?
My thoughts professionally was to omit that portion because in the rare case that there is foundation but not a wall, there's a chance to bring it into compliance. But I thought we'd just weigh in with the commission and see kind of how you guys feel.
I would be fine striking the word.
Or foundation, yeah.
Fine with striking the word, you say? Yeah, I'm okay with that. All right.
Well, if we have a live motion, I would second, maybe I'll wait until you're done typing, so then we have an actual
Strike out
ordinance.
Or foundation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, anyway, I will second the motion to adopt the proposed ordinance or revisions as revised tonight.
Extension.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All not in favor, say nay.
Nay.
No. I think, I'm not sure what I'm voting on. I think, so that's the language up here, the revised language?
Yeah, it's basically,
Yeah,
So the motion passes 3-2.
okay.
basically anything will have to come before us for review. But
Okay,
vertical or horizontal
okay,
could be.
You're going to stay on here for the rest of your life.
all right.
I'm gonna get everyone.
So that's, back to the agenda.
Thank you so much.
Oh, one other thought, echoing what Megan was saying earlier. This is amazing that you brought this to us so quickly. That's what occurred to me. Oh, really? Already?
Chris deserves all the
2
credit.
meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple.
So, new business?
We don't have new business for you. No,
Announcements, communications.
no.
Okay, then call the meeting adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's like extra curious about this because this is like the one that